Thank you everyone again for joining us. Appreciate you spending some time in your day with us to learn more about how to create an ERG program. To kick us off, we'll introduce our speakers. I'm Amanda Schnieders, Director of Content and Communications at Chronus. Been here about just shy of 8 years, which, in these days seems like a lifetime. But I've been working with our customers, for those past years to tell the kind of stories and impact of first and foremost mentoring and now more recently ERGs and kind of the impact on both human connection in the workplace as well as organizational objectives, and helping, kind of get that story out so that more people see the impact and the benefits. With me today is Lisa Lloyd, one of our senior program managers at Chronus. Lisa specializes in improving internal efficiencies that lead to high-value customer interactions. And with almost 20 years of expertise as a sociologist, Lisa has leveraged behavioral science to drive enablement and adoption that directly impacts revenue and retention. Over the last 5 years, Lisa has developed and facilitated certification courses, workshops, learning labs for nearly 4,000 teams across renowned brands such as Microsoft, American Express, Verizon, Estee Lauder, and other industry giants. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today. And I guess to kind of give us a little bit of silliness before we kind of kick off today, I was thinking about an icebreaker and going through the list of hundreds and hundreds of icebreakers and finding a bunch of duds. But I found one that was silly enough, I think, to kind of get us kicked off, which would be if you had to make a name for yourself by combining like your superpower or your kind of like skill or strength in life and your favorite your favorite, I guess you can say any food. I think it was breakfast food at the time, but any food of favorite. And to combine that, what would your name be?
Think long and hard. I'll drop mine in the chat.
Ooh, connection bagels.
Oh, a bagel is... A bagel is always a good time.
Intuitive pizza. I like this, Becky. I was trying to think of mine, and I think mine would be like rapport builder chocolate chip pancakes, which feels like long. So I would probably end up going by, an abbreviated name or something. But I think I like your storytelling linguine.
I like a good nickname. You can shorten it. But chocolate chip pancake, I think that's, every pancake is not the same. Chocolate chip has to kind of stay in there.
Mm-hmm.
Potential pastas.
Of course, it's like the alliteration it's hard not to go with something that is alliteration because it just sounds better, rolls off the tongue a little easier.
It does.
All right. Well, keep sharing your lovely superpower breakfast food nicknames with us if you'd like, or favorite food nicknames. We'll be here all the hour for it. But to kind of get us moving along, I wanted to quickly introduce, what is Chronus for any of you not as familiar with us. Chronus is an employee-driven development platform that offers mentoring and ERG management software to help enterprise organizations combat the disengagement and organizational connection crisis that we've been seeing, especially in the last handful of years. We've been helping large enterprises, government agencies, nonprofits, and academic institutions do this for the last 15 plus years with a platform that makes customers feel secure, supported, and ready to scale. And with that, I will give everyone just a quick housekeeping tip. If you're seeing anything on the right-hand side with chat, Q&A, things like that, if you want to participate in the chat, as many of you already have, please, ask questions within there, talk to each other, respond, let us know what you're interested in. But also, if you have any kind of formalized questions, feel free to drop that into the actual Q&A section as well. If you're not sure where to put it anywhere, and we will make sure it gets to the right place. But we would love to have you all engage as we are going through this presentation. So with that, I believe I can give us a quick overview of the agenda. We're going to talk about the history of ERGs and some of the specifics of what identity versus interest-specific ERGs means. We'll go through identifying purpose and scope, talk about some of the important aspects of leadership support and the key departments that will help ERGs be successful, creating safe spaces, and Lisa will take us through some ERG checklist resources. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Lisa to get us going.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you to our entire team who has been working on this presentation for a couple days, weeks, it feels like. And thank you for joining. Truly honored that you are going to spend some time with us. Today is not a monologue. I do not do monologues. I fully expect you to engage via the chat. So feel free, do not be shy, ask questions. We have more than enough time to pause and answer. And the first question I want to ask, and please drop it in the chat, are what are the first words that come to your mind when you hear employee resource group? And if you've never heard of it, you can say that too. But if you want to share 1 to 3 words that immediately pop into your mind, please add it to the chat. I see community, that's a huge one. Connection, support, belonging, and inclusion for sure. Advocacy, I love that one. Employee support benefits. Being seen, I like that one too. Belonging. So it seems that you all have a positive understanding of employee resource groups. Is that safe to say? Cultural intelligence, CJ, you and me are friends. Development, passionate people with resources, absolutely. Community, commonality, absolutely. These are great responses. I've run an ERG for almost 4 years, 4 or 5 years. I've learned a lot about ERGs, and I wanted to talk you through this. And let's talk about some, if we go to the next slide, some ERG history. So ERGs have been around for quite some time. I'm not going to tell you the first time they came around. And if you know, do not drop it in the chat just yet. But employee resource groups always have existed. They just haven't always been formal. Organizational subcultures have existed forever. There's always a group of people with shared interests or shared identity talking to one another and sharing their experiences. When we used to be in the office, it used to be people going to a different meeting after the meeting to talk about what happened in that meeting, or just kind of maybe a clique. It might seem like that. Maybe a clique of people who get along, who really have a vested interest in each other. And that has always existed at organizations. These subcultures, these groups of people that have a common set of values or experiences that differ from the dominant culture in the workplace. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see this nice little circle, and you'll see employee resource groups. That is the most formal approach to that type of fellowship. And then you also have employee business resource groups, which are very similar to ERGs, but they do focus much more heavily on business objectives. And then you have affinity groups that are a lot less formal, but equally important. Now, have you all heard of affinity groups and employee business resource groups? You can say yes in the chat, no in the chat. Just want to see where we all are with these terms. Yes. Okay, good. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide. No, Becky? Okay, we're going to pause for Becky because Becky says she likes pizza. I'm from New York. I hope she says she likes New York pizza, but I haven't seen that answer yet. But Becky, employee resource groups, employee business resource groups, affinity groups, all really depend on the maturity of the group. Most times people will start with an affinity group that's informal, kind of like those groups that we had in high school, like debate team or something like that. But essentially, as the group matures and becomes more formal and has resources and such, it might become an employee business resource group or an employee resource group with a budget, with collaboration from key departments. And so it really becomes a more fleshed out department or unit or community in the workplace. Yes, Shonda has shared, they call theirs inclusion networks at Coca-Cola. Great one. See? So those are the 3 that you'll hear largely, Becky. Today, we're going to focus on employee resource groups, but if you want to share anything that might lend itself to employee business resource groups or affinity groups, drop it in the chat and I'll be sure to get to it. All right, so to the next slide. Employee resource groups are critically important. A lot of times people may have a limited perspective on them, thinking that they are simply social clubs. They are not. They really do matter on a human and biological level. They fulfill one of the biggest areas in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, specifically belongingness and love. This is important. Every human needs this. This is not a thing that we just desire or sometimes want. It is critical to our success and wellness as humans. And this is critical even in your home life and your work life. Employee resource groups originally started in response to racial tensions way back when. And they were or had a definitive purpose of improving work conditions for alienated workers. Now, if you've ever heard of a union, if you've worked in a union, if you've managed people in a union, it kind of works similarly to that, just a lot less legal red tape. So ERGs were created to improve the conditions in the workplace, and not necessarily the physical conditions, but the emotional conditions of the workplace. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. Now, what most people forget or just simply don't know is that ERGs are profitable for business. 93% of employees believe that ERGs help unify the workplace and support employee well-being at work. If you think about how much time you spend at work, if you don't know, you spend a third of your life at work. It is critical that you feel like you belong. It is critical that you feel like you are seen, because it impacts how you work. It impacts your productivity. It impacts your retention at a particular company. It impacts how you communicate to your colleagues. 88% of ERG members feel a stronger sense of belonging within their organization. And if you compare that to members or teammates who are not in ERGs, then you'll see that there's definitely a need for this sense of belonging within the workplace. Now, it doesn't just benefit the members of the ERG, but it benefits the business overall. 55% of companies say that ERGs have positively impacted their recruiting efforts. If your company is recruiting, remember, there are 5 generations alive on Earth right now, and 3 of them are leaving the workforce. So you're going to look at Gen Z, and you're going to look at some of the younger people coming into the workforce, and a sense of belonging is critical to them. It is important to them. It is necessary for them, and it impacts the type of roles they apply to. It impacts how long they will stay at a company. So when you're thinking about the workforce that is coming into your company, knowing that this is a critical need from those generations means it should be part of your organizational goals and efforts. Also, 75% of companies say that they've helped retain employees. Now, I'm sure you've heard a lot of the conversation saying that people are leaving companies after 1 year or 2 years, and a lot of the onus has been on the employee, like, oh, employees don't want to stay, employees don't have loyalty anymore. But the thing about ERGs is that it is an intentional decision to curate safe spaces for the purpose of well-being, and subsequently the symptom or the outcome is retaining employees. Now, before I move on, are there any questions about ERGs and their impact and the necessity of them for human beings? Yes, Lisa, I have a question. No, Lisa, let's keep going. This feels good to me. Drop it in the chat. We do have a question. Hi, Amanda. How do you show benefit of ERGs belonging to remote employees? This is a great question. We are now in a digital first world. We are now in a virtual heavy world. And Amanda had mentioned earlier, I'm a sociologist. So if you let me nerd out for just a little bit, I'm going to give you some good fun facts. Isolation is terrible for the human mind. And as we are in a digital first culture right now, it is imperative that we think of ways to engage communities. Now, with Zoom fatigue, right, we've all felt it. We've all been in back-to-backs, 9 meetings back-to-back or 12 in a day, and we are just going and going and going. And in that workspace, when we are producing and we are collaborating and we are ideating, that is a very different part of the brain from just existing. And in order to minimize Zoom fatigue and in order to increase engagement, we want to trigger the parts in our mind that reflect who we are as human beings. What are our interests? What are our identity? What is our identity? What are the things that we hold dear? So when we think about this benefit, it helps with productivity because it shifts gears into that creative part of our mind so that when we go back to the working part of our minds, we are able to ideate and have a level of inspiration that we may not have had before. Additionally, talking to like-minded people or talking to people you share an identity with really brings things out of you that were not there before. It brings a sense of safety and security, right? And so that is going to impact how you approach your work afterward. Amanda, do you feel like that added or that answered your question? Also, there's a ton of stats that we can give you as well. I run an ERG remotely. Yes. So I am going to give you some tips and some engagement practices to work with remote ERGs. It's at the end, so sit tight. I will get to that. But yes, it is really important. And many times we fall into, let me do an email or let me do, excuse me. My daughter is hungry. Let me do an email or let me do a newsletter, but there are multiple ways to still engage in a virtual environment, and we'll talk about that, Amanda. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. Now, remember earlier I said that ERGs have always existed, but they have not been formally structured. Essentially, all of those subcultures have energy, right? All of those subcultures have a collective energy. They are fellowshipping with one another. They are supporting each other. They are collaborating each other. And ERGs bring that energy to the forefront. They bring it to the surface level. So if you are not collecting that energy, you really cannot measure it. You cannot leverage it. And most of all, you cannot identify it. When you think of starting an ERG, you are building upon the subcultures that already exist informally in the workplace. And you want to formalize these mentorship opportunities. Now, one thing that I've noticed a lot is that a lot of people don't realize ERGs are a form of mentorship, right? They are a form of exchanging ideas, sharing information, positively supporting one another, amplifying each other in the workplace. And ERG helps you harness that collective energy and highlight leaders that you may not have thought of otherwise, you may not have seen otherwise. It brings skills out of people that may not be used in their actual job title. So these are the ways that you can harness that collective energy by bringing up an ERG, a formal structure for communication, for fellowship, for engagement that continues to grow and sets a precedent for other subcultures within your organization. We'll get you some stats, Shwanda. Next slide. Now, this is something that I call identity versus interest-specific ERGs. I think that they fall into two categories, identity and interest-specific. So let's go. Let's talk about it. Identity versus interest-specific ERGs are similar, but they are not the same. They're more like cousins. They are not twins. Now, identity ERGs are things that we cannot hide, things that impact how people engage with us, view us, admire us, respect us, or don't respect us, right? These are the things that we cannot hide. As you can see, I'm a Black woman with red lipstick. This is something about my identity that impacts me in the workplace at all times. Whereas interest specific has nothing to do with your identity fully. But these are things that you are interested in, things that are important to you, and things that you want to have conversations with people over. Many times we'll talk about what's streaming on Netflix, or what music we're listening to, or what concerts we've been to, those interest specific things that are not easily identifiable, but truly bring joy into the workplace. Now, they require different things. Identity specific ERGs require intentional curation. We're talking about race and ethnicity. We're talking about gender, religion, sexual orientation, veteran status, things that impact their quality of life. Now, identity specific ERGs require a different level of permissions. Is the ERG specifically for members of that community, or will it also include allies of that community? Will there be channels that are private for the community only, and then public for the community and their allies? How are you going to get that information? A lot of information on race, sexual orientation, gender, religion, veteran status lives in your HR departments. So if you're thinking about identity specific ERGs, there is another level of intention and curation that comes with that. Another thing I would like to point out, in running identity specific ERGs, that takes a particular skill set. It is not common. It is not something that we just are born with. It really does require learning, training, resources, potentially certifications. So if you're thinking of starting an identity specific ERG, also think about what will qualify the leaders of that ERG to protect their members, sustain movement and upward mobility, and empower them and amplify them within the organization. I'm going to pause here because I gave you quite a bit on identity specific ERGs. Are there any questions about this? And have you ever heard about it like this? Or did you know it, but you never heard it called by this name? Does this feel like it's on the right track? Drop it in the chat. You're very quiet. So everybody heard of the term identity specific ERGs before? Yes, Lisa. No, Lisa. I don't even know if my internet is working. Okay, here we go. We got some things coming in. We have women's ERG. Okay, so some have heard of this, some have not, right? You may have experienced these ERGs, but we probably haven't put a label on it, right? Formal definition, Shelby. I'm a definition girl, okay? I need an answer. I need a category to put things in. And so this was the easiest way for me to explain it to people. So thank you for sharing your familiarity with this, or lack of familiarity. Yes, Clynette. Okay. Oh, Clynette, you have heard of identity-based. Okay, great. The next one is interest specific. We really talked about that. It's about shared hobbies, personal and professional interests, and people can opt in or out without consequence. Now, this is really key because if you're interested in books or cycling or gaming, you can opt in or out of that ERG, and it doesn't make a difference to anyone else but you. You might feel like, oh man, I miss talking to my friends about gaming, or oh, I really wish I had that community still. However, with identity specific ERGs, we cannot opt in or out of our identity. Remember, even if I'm not in the ERG, I am still part of that subculture. So when you're thinking of that, even the people who are not members of your identity specific ERG are still to be served by your identity specific ERG. I'm going to pause there. That was a lot. Did everybody understand what I was trying to say? Did I say it clearly? Even in an identity specific ERG, if there are people who qualify for it and are not in it, your ERG still has to serve them. And that's a big one. All right. Thank you, Kisa. Okay, we're going to keep moving. Good job, everyone. Now, there's a big difference between identity and interest. There's a couple of differences, but one of the biggest differences is environment. And it talks about creating or curating safe spaces and psychologically safe spaces, which goes back to what I mentioned earlier. This takes a particular skill set, training, resources, research, education. You don't just get to a point where you understand the critical nuances of a culture, even if you are part of that culture. There is always learning to be done, because in every culture, there are multiple subcultures. So for Cynthia, I see your question. Military and first responders, majority are not vets of either. Is that identity or interest specific? Now, when Cynthia, when you're saying majority are not vets of either, do you mean they are like family members of military? Or I'm trying to make sure I get you the right answer, Cynthia. But while you think of that answer, if you are military, that is identity specific. When you hand your life over to the military, that becomes part of your identity. Right? Even if you are a family member of a veteran, it becomes part of your identity, in such that maybe you are moving a lot, right? You're an Army brat, right? It becomes part of your criteria. It impacts how you are viewed in the world, especially as we have growing tensions in the world, right? People are responding viscerally to military and their family members. So yes, I would say military ERGs would qualify as identity specific, as well as first responders are identity specific. I used to work for a nursing organization. When you are a first responder, that's not something you can take off. You can be off the clock, but if something happens, you are required to respond. So that would also qualify as identity specific. Now, if you have people in those groups who just want to love up on those who serve, those are considered allies to the members of an identity specific group. All right, that was a great question, Cynthia. Did I answer it? Yay, nay, or do you want to go deeper? While I let you type that, we're going to talk about the psychological safe space that is required for identity specific. Yay. Identity specific ERGs. Now, I believe, I forgot who asked me, but the resources of curating spaces that are virtual can include permissions. Is everyone invited to this meeting? Probably not. When I was running a Black ERG, our monthly fellowship meetings were only for members of the community. And then if we invited someone into that meeting, we took a poll on if everyone was comfortable with it. Another thing is we do not record our monthly meetings, right? Those are safe spaces, and we know that recordings can end up anywhere. So these are little things that you can do to curate psychological safe spaces. Another thing to do when you're trying to accomplish that is invite mental health professionals as speakers into these spaces to help you identify what areas of opportunity exist. We cannot do it alone. One of the things that I see a lot with ERGs is they're so passionate about helping people that they don't ask for help. So when you're thinking specifically about identity specific ERGs, think about the people you can collaborate that can help you curate safe spaces and give you ideas for how to do so. All right, we're gonna keep going. We're feeling good. We're feeling great. Keep going. Yes, Lisa, any more questions? Nope. All right. All right. So one of the first things that you want to do when you are starting an ERG is identify your purpose and scope. What are you trying to do? Who are you trying to do it for? And how are you going to accomplish the thing that you're trying to do? Mission, vision, and objective. Mission and vision statements are typically 1 to 3 lines. If your mission and vision statement is a paragraph or a thesis, go back and cut it. We want to get to the point. We want to understand what you are trying to do. We want to eliminate jargon. We want to be as clear and as concise as possible. Mission and vision. Now, when it comes to objectives, I like to keep a rule of 3. If you have more than 3 objectives, you are all over the place. You want to nail down your objectives to 1, 2, or 3, because when you are presenting to your organization the value of an ERG, if you are presenting too many objectives, it will be an impossible task and you will fail before you get started. You want to create objectives that you can succeed in and stretch beyond that as the ERG continues to grow and scale. Do not try to bite off more than you can chew. You will only be very sad. All right. Next slide is, now when we're thinking of objectives and goals, most of you have heard of the top 4, right? Recruitment and retention. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Cultural celebration. Someone mentioned that in the chat. Of course, professional development and community outreach, right? But how many of you in your ERG experience have discussed policy influence, leadership development, and support and resources in the form of giving your organization what it needs to authentically respond to scenarios and situations that impact a particular community within the organization? Yes, I've talked about policy, leadership, and support. No, I've probably stayed on the top 4. Tamara? Yes, maybe, but I'd love to hear you say, Amanda, I thought you'd never ask. All right, I'm going to focus today on policy influence, leadership development, and support and resources, because I find that those are often overlooked. So let's go to that slide. There we go. All right. Now, policy influence. When an ERG has matured and an ERG has formalized itself and has really taken stock of what they are trying to do and create a lasting impact. So in my mind, there are 2 things that ERGs really want to do. They want to move their organizations forward, and 2, they want to make a lasting impact. So after I leave my ERG, I want to make sure that there is something there that will withstand time. And then I also want to move my organization forward. Like I mentioned, 5 living generations right now. When we are moving and I'm going out of the workforce, right, we have to move the organization forward and make it welcoming for the incoming generations. So with policy influence, we want to talk about all of the things that are hosted in that ERG. Where does that land in the way you recruit candidates? Where does that land when you think about who is getting promoted and the speed of said promotions for some versus others? What are we doing about over policing certain members of a team and not others? What are we doing about microaggressions in the workplace, right? What are the topics that are in your ERGs that are being discussed in your ERGs? How is that impacting the way your organization does business? That is policy influence. Remember, ERGs they really have insight on your blind spots. So you want to talk to your ERGs. You want to know what your ERGs are saying and bring that into your policies, bring that into your protocols, bring that into your procedures, bring that into your standards. The second one is leadership development. Now, everybody will say, yes, we're all about professional development. And then they'll say in the same breath, hey, we're looking for our next leader and we're going to do an external hire. And I cringe inside every time, because your next leader 9 times out of 10 is already at your company. They are already there. The issue is that a lot of times they are not seen in those capacities based on their role. For example, if you are an individual contributor, you have your head down, you're doing your work, you love your job, that's what you like to do, great, no problem. But it's not until you get into an ERG position, maybe you're an ERG leadership chair, that people see qualities in you that they did not have access to before. So ERGs are great great soil for growing the next leader in your organizations. People who are already going above and beyond, people who are already volunteering their time to move your organization forward, already have great qualities of leadership. Your next leader is in an ERG. Third, support and resources. Now, the first ERG was created in response to racial tensions, right? And we are still seeing that today. We saw a surge of ERGs being created following the murder of George Floyd. People wanted to be more inclusive, more diverse, understand the nuances of particular communities. Now, as an ERG who has an inside scoop to a particular community's experiences, when things in the world happen and organizations are scrambling with their marketing and communications team, should we put out a statement on this? Is this statement authentic? Do we sound insane? You want to communicate with the ERG of the community that is directly impacted. Okay, we are seeing it everywhere. Things are happening in our country, in our world, that are targeting specific communities. If you are a senior leader in an organization and you are drafting a communications about an event or a situation that impacted a community that you are not a part of, and you do not reach out to the ERG that hosts that community, you are making a mistake. And you are going to pay for that mistake. And it is a very heavy cost. So as an ERG, how are you supporting your senior leadership, your C-suite executives to weigh in on situations authentically and organically with input from community members directly impacted? So these are things that you want to think about. Do you want to think about them in the first week of your ERG? Probably not. But as you grow, I want you to keep these here as your stretch goals, so to speak. Okay. Yes, I see a good comment here. It is difficult to speak about LGBTIA plus issues in Florida, so our ERG is at a standstill at the moment trying to strategize. Now, standstills are still good. LGBTQIA plus, yes, it's okay. It's a lot of letters in there. Standstills, you can still be productive in a standstill. And what I do like most about standstills, because I've been in scenarios like this as well, is it is a great time to gather your resources. When you are building an ERG, you are going to be under incredible scrutiny in terms of, is this ERG valuable? Is this impacting our bottom line in a positive way? Is this increasing engagement? You have to prove these things the more formal and the stronger your ERG gets. So if you are at a standstill for whatever reason, gather your data, gather your resources, gather your use cases. In some ways, in my experience, I've also created standard operating protocols or procedures for our senior leadership when they wanted to discuss something that impacted our community. We also created one-pagers for people who would one day speak to our community, the do's and the don'ts, things to look out for, things we do not tolerate, things that we celebrate. So this is a great time to build your repository of documents and expectations and concerns while things are at a standstill. Okay, Wanda, with the election approaching, and in such a hypersensitive political climate, would an ERG group around this help with differing opinions versus a don't talk politics at work policy? That is an incredible question, Wanda, and I like where your head is going. Now, what is interesting about this is for certain communities, it has always been a hypersensitive political climate. This is nothing new for certain communities, right? So I think an ERG would help. However, it would need specific guidelines, and you would need to know that there would not be retaliation, and that's almost impossible to know. So if we were thinking of creating an ERG specifically to discuss or to have political discussions, that will require a heavy lift from HR to ensure that retaliation is not a thing, to ensure potentially anonymity for comments, to provide guidelines for having that conversation. You can't say this, you can't say that, you know. It is a heavier lift, but part of creating an ERG is determining demand. So what I would do, Wanda, is understand what the demand is for something like that, and what are the top 3 priorities of people who want something like that. Is it to discuss particular issues? Is it to discuss particular camps? Is it to discuss what it will look like if some of the teammates move out of the country, and what do those policies support? I was working for one company at a time when abortion rights were gutted, and the CEO at the time decided that any woman at the company or any person who would give birth and could give birth would be compensated if they wanted to leave the country or their state to have that done. So there are ways to put policies in place to protect people in a hypersensitive political climate, and that may not necessarily be an ERG, but it could be. And it could be really interesting. It would just need a lot of guidelines and structure. And I think starting with those questions of what is the demand for this, and what is your top 3 priorities if we were to build this, would be a great start, Wanda. That was a great question. I was not expecting that. All right, Wanda, did that satisfy your question? Do you have a follow-up question? Does anybody else have a question before we go to the next slide? Yes, I have more questions. No, Lisa, let's keep going. Okay. All right. Good job. Good job, everyone. All right. Now, leadership support in key departments. Like I just mentioned in that last chat, that my former CEO at another company really jumped in when women's rights were kind of gutted. I want to say last year or 2 years ago. Last year, I think. He jumped in, and he was able to jump in because he had a direct line to that ERG women that were directly impacted by that. And so that is a key example of how close-knit ERGs need to be to leadership teams. The key teams that you are most likely to work with is your human resources team or people team, your finance team, and senior level executives. And the invisible print here is senior level executives who are allies to the ERG members. That is critical. If you have an executive sponsor who is not an ally, you do not have an executive sponsor, okay? All right. So you're going to work with your human resources team because they are going to help you understand and think through the structure, the leadership format, permissions and access to critical information such as race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, religion, veteran status. You're going to talk to finance because finance budgets all of this. Finance wants to know, how much money do you need for something like this? What does fellowship cost? What does your events cost? Are you buying lunch for ERG members? Are you paying for a venue to meet in different cities for the ERG members? Money matters. You have to have these conversations. And what I really, really want to stress to you is that if you are waiting for someone to give you the answer, you will not get it, okay? You want to come to these conversations with something, even if it's not fully fleshed out, even if it's not amazing and sophisticated and formal. You want to give something that leadership can react to. And so there are a ton of resources out there, and we are going to share quite a bit with you, but you want to have something that you're going to the table with. Remember, ERGs are an extracurricular for business. You want to make it as easy as possible for someone to say yes to you, okay? Now, what does that look like on the day-to-day? Like I mentioned, HR is really helpful at helping you create organizational goals for your ERG, or to tie your goals for the ERG to organizational goals. And you're going to need that when it comes time to discuss the value of your ERG and how it is impacting business objectives. You're going to want HR to help you with determine key performance indicators. Is it attendance? Is it retention? Is it diversity? You want to discuss with them the structure and the metrics that are going to tell the story of your ERG success later. Budget allocation. How is that money going to be spent? And when I say how, not just on what, but how. If you give your team members Uber gift cards for $25 so that on your virtual meeting you can all eat lunch together, that is a potential tax liability. So you want to have these conversations to protect and insulate the company from any issues down the line. And you also want to protect your employees from any tax issues down the line. Now, with HR as well, they can lead you to diversity, equity, and inclusion training that will help you lead identity-specific ERGs. And they can also help with feedback and engagement support in the form of surveys or town halls or fireside chats. And they can help you determine the best executive sponsor for your group. Remember, many times if you are planning to start an ERG, or if you're in an ERG, you may not have access to senior level leaders. So you really do want someone who can build that bridge for you and make suggestions on who they know to be a true ally of your ERG and who has the time commitment to do so, because that's also important. Now, I know we wanted to talk about this. So are there any other questions about how these teams can support you starting your ERG on the day-to-day? We can keep moving. All right, we're going to keep moving. Now, when you start an ERG, yes, it is community. Yes, it is fellowship. Yes, it is conversation. But what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed, well, gets renewed. Okay? So you want to make sure that you are holding on to the data that tells your ERG story, whether it be member engagement, participation in events, retention, career mobility, or growth. What does that look like in a sentence? Well, 90% of ERG members received a promotion in 2 years versus 70% of non-ERG members. You want to hold it up against the people who are not in ERGs to highlight how ERGs are making an impact. Now, you have to be careful with the language because correlation and causation are not the same. But if you see that people in ERGs are getting promoted faster, are experiencing more career mobility, it might be safe to say that that mentorship, that structure is working in people's favor. Okay, Cynthia has a question. Which area or executive should be overseeing as council of ERGs? In many instances, it is the HR team. Many instances. I have seen finance once in a blue take over. And that is predominantly when the ERG leaders are receiving compensation. Okay, so that's usually when finance will take over. But otherwise, the majority of the time, I typically see HR or the people team overseeing the ERG. If an organization does have a DEI or an IDEB team, inclusion, diversity, equity, and belonging, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, however you say it, then usually that team will oversee the ERGs. But as you have all seen on LinkedIn and through our workforce, DEI offices are getting wiped out wildly fast. So it's probably going to be those HR teams. Very good question, Cynthia. All right, let's talk about creating safe spaces. All right, I forgot who asked. So we're in this virtual virtual first world, right? Like, how do you keep people engaged? When you're thinking about your meetings, it's not just the meeting, essentially, it's thinking about the optimal frequency and the duration of said meeting and the format of said meeting. A lot of times I see people having ERGs and it's the same person talking all the time. Even though you have a leadership chair or a leadership team on an ERG, you want to bring those members to the forefront and give everybody a chance to lead this ERG or be a leader in this ERG in ways that are comfortable for them and also ways that stretch them. Right? Because what we really want out of these ERGs is for people to be seen and afforded opportunities that they would not have otherwise. Now, let's say, suppose we have a question. This is a very good one. Sidra, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Suppose your company does not have any execs that identify with your EIG. For example, no women execs or no Black execs. That has happened to me. Sidra. Absolutely. When I was running the Black ERG, we did not once have a Black executive sponsor. We didn't have a Black exec at the time. And that was a hard blow for us to accept, to be very honest with you. But that is why allies are very, very key. Now, I'm going to tell y'all, we got 8 minutes, so I'm going to make this really quick. The power of mentorship. I had a mentor who is not a Black woman. He's a white man. I had a mentor who was guiding me through my career and just being an overall support system and really understanding who I was as a Black woman and how that impacted my work life. And after many years of conversations and all of these things, learning from him and him learning from me, eventually he becomes the sponsor for the Black ERG, right? So even if you have a person who you are connected with, who's in communication with you, who is willing to learn and be led by the community, you may have an opportunity to have an executive sponsor that is not a member of that community. Additionally, it is okay if you do not have an executive sponsor. You would just have to have a very strong leadership team. Now, there's a little bit more questions. Compensation for mentors. What are pros and cons of paying people to mentor? Pros is, everybody needs more money, inflation. Cons is incentive changes things, right? So that's really tough, especially because how do you cultivate the value of each mentor to land on a universal payment structure? That's a little tough. In order to do that, you would need tons of research to create a baseline. I don't have the answer, but I know how to get you there. Research would help. Are the mentors fellow members? We got into some legal gray area with mentorship since our employees are not trained to be mentors. What does mentor training look like? What does that look like? Is there a global certification? What does that mean, right? And maybe it's okay, let's agree on what mentorship training is and get people trained, right? Yes, Amanda, I get people might feel like it's mutually beneficial and not feel the need for compensation. Very good point. All right, let's keep going. We have 5 minutes. I want to make sure that we get to everyone's questions. We already talked about a lot of this, but I just want to highlight platforms and adjacent groups. Work with other ERGs. There's another ERG that might be more mature. There's ERGs in organizations that are not yours, right? Reach out. I have a ton of people on LinkedIn who reach out to me saying, I'm starting an ERG, Lisa, can you help me? We've never met before. But sometimes the answer is outside of your organization, for sure. And for platforms, think about what platforms support the thing that you're trying to do, mission, value, and objective. Is it a spreadsheet? Is it a mentoring tool like Chronus? Where are you in your journey and what tools support that? Because those tools are part of your safe spaces. Oh, thank you, Thea. Now, I forgot who asked me. Establishing communication methods. There's a ton of methods that you can use, but I just want to call out some things that people often don't look at. Your ERGs should be shared throughout the organization. It should live on your intranet or employee portal. Awareness is key. Webinars and workshops, again, this speaks to the value of the ERG, the professional development, the leadership training, the applied learning of mentorship, the tangible outcomes of these relationships. Video messages. Sometimes you don't want to type an email. Sometimes I don't want to read an email. Send me a video message. Make it personal. Make it authentic. This is relationship. And executive updates. I do not want to minimize the importance of executive updates. If you are starting an ERG, you want to get into your executive's newsletter or your executive's remarks at the all hands meeting. Whether or not the executive is your executive sponsor, it is important that ERGs are reflected at the highest level of talking points, right? That gives them validity, that amplifies their efforts, that shows people that even though I'm not a part of this community, or even though I'm not a member of this community, what is going on in that community is important to this organization. All right, we're gonna keep going. Next slide. Oh, it's not working. Here we go. So this question for you, I'm not going to stay too long on it, but if you could create an ERG, what would it be? I know we spent a lot of time talking about identity specific ERGs. However, they can also be interest specific. If I were to create an ERG, it would be about pasta. For real. I love pasta. I want to talk about pasta all day. I eat pasta for breakfast. I want to find my people. Okay. Oh, I love that, Clynette, that your CEO is part of your ERG. So drop in the chat, if you could create an ERG, what would it be? While you are dropping that in the chat, I'm going to talk about some resources for you. All right, your ERG checklist. Now, these are my 6 steps. This may differ depending on what you're reading, but this is how I have imagined the ERG checklist. 1, identifying the purpose and the scope. That is self-explanatory. Gaining leadership support. You want to have these relationships with executives, even if they are not your executive sponsor. The thing about ERGs is it usually, especially identity specific, it usually has people who do not have access to those rooms. So who is carrying the topics and the themes and the important issues of your ERGs into the rooms that you do not have access into? Establishing your leadership team. Is it volunteer run? Is it a leadership chair? Is it the leadership team with an executive sponsor? There are a ton of ways to do the same thing. Find which way works for you for the time being. You can always change it later. Set measurable objectives. Set objectives you can get. I want to host 4 meetings this year. That's a valuable objective. That's a good one. You don't have to have a meeting every month if that doesn't work. Promote and recruit members. Just because I am a Black woman does not automatically mean I'm going to be a part of the Black ERG. You have to make it worth my while. You have to promote it. You have to recruit me. You have to say this is a valuable use of my time. I'm already stretched too thin, like many of us are. And number 6, develop programs and initiatives. What are we doing with the time that these people have given us for the 60 minutes or the 90 minutes that we meet? Are you having an event? Are you hosting a cooking class? What is it? And last but certainly not least, these are some of the resources, and we're excited for the stats that we shared with you. So we will be sharing that later. And I think Amanda is talking to this. We are at time. So if you have to go, we definitely appreciate it. We're going to wrap this up in 30 seconds or less.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing. And I feel like to fit all of that in one thing, your energy has me, slightly sweating, I think, from all of this. But great information. And thank you all for the questions. We really appreciate it. If you are interested in learning more about Chronus ERG software, because not only all the things that Lisa brought up today, but obviously making a standardized, centralized approach to your ERGs so that a women's ERG and a Black employees ERG, or an LGBTQIA plus ERG has a standardized experience, and it's not happening in little pockets all over your organization, please reach out to us to learn more about our ERG software. You can click the Get Demo button up in that rightish corner or middle of your screen, depending on how you're looking at it, with the Get Demo if you'd like to learn more about how Chronus software will help you. But ultimately, we thank you all for your time today. Appreciate it. And let us know how else we can be of help. We will be sending out the recording. We will be sending out Lisa's slides. We'll be sharing all this information with you in the next 24 hours. So don't you worry. And if you have any additional questions or any other things about ERGs that you want us to have another webinar about, because obviously we packed too much into this and we need multiples of these. But if there's anything else you would like to know, please let us know in the chat, or connect with us through chronus.com or more info at chronus.com. Thank you all so much for attending. Lisa, thank you. Take a break, drink some water. You've been doing far too much in the last hour. We appreciate it. Everyone have a great day.
Bye, everyone.